LorenaGaibor, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Denver in the Department of Social Work, Graduate School of Social Work. So a little different departure from my colleagues, but I think it works well together. My part of the paper is more looking at the strengths of the communities that we visited. From a social work perspective, we tend to be very strengths-focused. And so I took that lens with me down there. I'm also a Latina and an American. And so whenever I go to Latin America, I always get this sense of the difference of culture. I feel this kind of depressuring happening when I'm there, a sense of relaxation and warmth and connection. And as soon as I come back, when I've entered back into my life, I feel the difference that disconnection, alienation, and stress, and need to do, and accomplish. That's very much, I think, a part of our individualistic culture. And so I looked at that in my paper, and I looked at what we could learn from these communities. They have, I think, a lot to teach us, and I think some of the others, Victoria specifically, talked about the collectivist cultures of this region of Chiapas that we visited, and they shared with us the challenges that they're facing, but also we got to experience the tremendous, like I said, warmth and resilience and courage and finding their voice after so long. These women were so inspiring to me, and I think to all of us, to hear them speak up, even if their voice was shaking sometimes. And I know I can relate to that sometimes, having to speak up when you don't feel so strong, but knowing, being confident that there's something that you have of value to share. And it's not just about what you have to share, but about the voice that you're representing your community. And so these women are incredibly courageous to be out there learning what they can and then going back and sharing that with their communities and creating spaces where women can be heard. And so what I did was in thinking about that, I did a little research on happiness and looked at a psychologist, Tim Kaser, who talks about value systems, and that I think go very well with the kind of the two different systems that I looked at: collectivist societies and individualistic societies. He looks at extrinsic goals and intrinsic goals. And extrinsic goals are goals that are focused externally, as you can imagine the word. And specifically, he researches three key areas of extrinsic goals that I think are prevalent in our individualistic capitalist society: money, image, and status. And then he contrasts those to intrinsic goals that I think are more related to these collectivist societies, which are connection, relationships with others, personal growth, and a desire to help, and kind of a community feeling, help and work with others. And so the results of the research that he found were that folks with extrinsic value goals have less satisfaction in their lives, they're more depressed, more anxious, have less of a feeling of vitality and energy, and they're always seeking for external gratification to find some fulfillment and keep going. In contrast to that, folks with more intrinsic goals report more happiness, more vitality, less depression, less anxiety, more of this sense of ease and the feeling of well-being. And I also turned to the field of addiction research. More of a newer research that's coming out, I think, of what we usually think of addiction research is, we've been in this 100-year war on drugs, where it's focused on criminalizing drugs and criminalizing people that have addictions to drugs, right? Locking them up. And that's a whole other thing, but it's not working. It's not working. And so there are countries and communities that are trying new things. For instance, Portugal, for the past 15 years, has decriminalized drugs. And they've seen radical improvements in their society. Their overdose rate that was tremendously high has basically gone down to zero. And that's because all of the money that they previously spent in incarcerating people and criminalizing folks with addiction. They decriminalized, first of all the drugs, so nobody being locked up for having an addiction problem. And then they turned that money towards connecting people with their communities again, helping to find jobs for people, incentivizing employers to hire folks for a year, helping to pay half of the wages. It's been an incredible difference that they've seen. So the statistics are already out now, 15 years ongoing, and nobody wants to go back to the old system. And so I looked at the research by journalist and author Johan Hari, who studied addiction, and he says, he's famous TED Talk from 2015, if you want to look it up. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, he says. The opposite of addiction is connection. And he cites research about that kind of led us into this addiction field that we're in, was more on drugs. This famous experiment that was done on rats, where a rat was placed in a cell by itself and given drug water and given the option of regular water. Well, the rats, 9 out of 10, overdosed and died. They went for the drug water. And so our whole approach to addiction is based on that. It's based on this thinking that the drugs are the problem, and if we can just get these addictive people to stop using the drugs, they can't help themselves. These drugs are the addiction. They're the problem. People can't some people can't control themselves with drugs, right, or alcohol or whatever. And I think that that's still the prevalent norm of what we think. But another researcher came along, a psychologist, Bruce Alexander, and he redid the experiment but did added to it. He thought, well, maybe it's not the drugs. Maybe it's the environment. Maybe it's the cage. This rat is by itself. So he created a new cage called Rat Park with many, it was like a rat paradise, a whole village of rats of different sexes. There's some toys in there for the rats, plenty of food, warm, comfy beds, a wheel for them to run and exercise. It was paradise. They multiplied, grew, were happy. None of the rats overdosed on the drug water. They again offered the drug water, the regular water. Nobody OD'd. And that's because they had all of their needs met. They were happy. They were connected. And so the idea, this research, is that it's the cage that matters. It's the environment, the connection. We're, as humans, we're mammals. Mammals are tribal beings. We thrive, and we can only survive, actually, in connection to each other. We learn everything that we know, right? We learn from our interactions with others. And so I posit in my paper that our society, our capitalist, individualistic society, while it offers many wonderful things and many tangible returns, right? We're all up here, very professional, with our degrees and with our good livelihoods in comparison to the people we visited in Chiapas, you could say. We have a lot more. But really, do we? That's what I question when I go down to Latin America. What do we have that's so much more? We have more tangible things, but do we have peace of mind? Do we have connection? Do we have happiness, which is what life is really all about? I think that what most humans want. And so I think that we are living in that isolated cage, and we can learn from these communities that that's not the essence of who we are as natural beings. We are not meant to live in isolation to each other or to be in constant competition with each other and striving for these external goals. We're meant to be living in harmony with nature, with each other, collaborating, and to have that connection. And so there's a lot more I could say, but I'm going to jump to what can we do about it. And I think we have some great examples of what people can do about it. Victoria and Lynn were talking about the CNI, the Congreso Nacional de mass Indigenous people Congress that have come together and have proposed for the first time in history this radical opposition candidate that they're going to be proposing. They've decided, I don't know if they've decided who it is, but they've decided that it's going to be a woman. I think that's very purposeful, it's very intentional. And their platform is, as Victoria talked about, is based on the environment, it's based on social justice, it's based on giving a voice to people that have been voiceless for far too long, and whose values have not been recognized or seen as important as our Western values. And I say it's the opposite. We really need to take heed and return to a natural balance as humans, coexisting with our environment in a better way, coexisting with each other in a better way. And that starts with us as consumers here. I think we really need to take responsibility of our consumption and the impacts that we have on the environment and on other communities. So I think the CNAE gives one model of, on a more, what we would call macro level change from communities proposing this national candidate. And that's been done in other ways as well. There's this concept of vivir bien coming from the Bolivians who have proposed to the UN Council on the Environment or something. I'm getting that wrong, but I didn't get into the weeds of it too much. But they put out a proposal for asking for the rights of Mother Earth, of the planet. Just as we have human rights, we need to also consider the rights of our Earth and what we're doing to it, the destruction we're causing. And along with that proposal, they talk about introducing a carbon debt to the nations that have historically been the largest carbon-emitting countries. So Japan, the U.S., and European countries. Collectively, we emit more than 50% of carbon pollution on the planet, and we're only 11% of the population. And conversely to that, the Earth's population is of about 50% of the Earth's population only emit about 11% of carbon emissions. So we have a tremendous historical debt to be paid in many ways. It's just environmental. I'd say there's a lot more than that to be paid. So in that proposal by Bolivia's government, it gives an opportunity they have a whole framework of how they lay out sustainable development, how that should work. And also in my report, I cite a discussion paper, an Oxfam report from 2012 that also similarly looks at goals of ecological justice or sustainability, that a threshold that we shouldn't go beyond, and we're already kind of going beyond with some of our emissions, and social justice. And this researcher, creates a diagram that's beautiful that maybe I should have put up for you, of a donut, where the outer ring is the environmental limits of where we shouldn't go beyond, and the inner ring is the social justice elements of human rights and all of the necessities that humans need: food, water, justice, voice, all these things for having a good livelihood for all peoples. And so in the ring, that donut presents, and nation by nation, I guess, that would need to be created, how to stay in a sustainable way, thinking about those two very important areas of ecological justice and social justice. And then finally, I'd say this really is a question of values, and something that we really need to think through on an individual level, as well as on a community level, and then eventually, hopefully, on a broader level, policy level, of our value system. And there's one nation that we can think of that I'm sure you've heard of that poses an alternative, Bhutan, with their gross national happiness index. Sounds very cute, right? But it's actually really important. That government has given priority to the happiness of their community, of their population, of their citizens, and of the environment, making sure that they're living in balance, a balanced life. So 60% of that country's land forest land. So they're doing their part. They're keeping our air clean. They're doing more than their part, actually. And they're prioritizing all the things that their population needs, from education to culture to spirituality. All these things are a Buddhist nation. And so I don't think that's very surprising that they've made that a priority. But it's in huge contrast to what most nations that are more focused in this capitalist direction have as their primary focus, and what that is GDP, gross domestic product, making money. And so it's something to think about, and it was something for me to think about. I wrote a nice big paper on it. Thank you very much.
We have a couple of other photos to share with you, and so obviously talk a little bit more. Feel free to ask us questions about the trip. We were there for about 9 days total. This is the San Juan Church, San Juan Cholula Church, which is a Mayan church. It's very restricted as far as who can go in, and I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I brought it up in my paper a little bit. Spirituality is something that's very important in the communities that we visited. It really resonated with me. I'm a Buddhist, that's why I brought it up, Tom. Yes. And I was just really moved. This is an old Catholic church that was taken over by Social Mayan community, and it's used in with their ancient Mayan traditions, and actually kind of a blend. You know, a lot of probably proper Mayan traditions were they had to hide, conceal when the Spaniards first came in, and that's been preserved. So if you go into the church, there's no pews, and they're practicing their Mayan practices. But all around the church, there are these Catholic saints, but they have other meanings as well. Kind of like Santeria has done and other religions have done. They've incorporated their ancient traditions with these European traditions to be able to continue their practices. And it's just a beautiful place where only once a year do they allow Catholic priests to come in and to do baptism for all the children that were born that year and that kind of thing. But otherwise, it's covered in this bed of pine needles, this green kind of carpet, and indigenous families or communities go and they form these little, like a cuadrado, a little altar with candles and with flowers, and it's very intentional, and it's this practice of kind of curanderismo, where they've been given instructions by a curandera, a healer, and they're going there to petition for either something that they want or something that they don't want, sometimes an illness, something like that, or to give thanks for something they've received. And so it just, all these little groups of families that we saw were there, including we saw a ritual sacrifice of a chicken, and it wasn't horrifying. It was actually done very humanely in a way. I remember talking to Lynn about this last night, and she said if I could only know that the chicken that I eat, the animals that are slaughtered were slaughtered in such a way with care. There was no screaming or anything. And there's no pictures allowed to be taken in the church. And I was inspired by the communities that we visited and the strength and the resilience that we saw, that they're able to maintain their dignity, in many essences recapture it because it was lost, but now are very much living with their traditions outwardly instead of hiding it so much.
And then we have a couple more of an environmental home or building, really, residential home that was built by some architects in a connection to Otros Mundos, which is an environmental organization. And everything about the building materials and the style of architecture had to do with being environmentally friendly. So the walls are made of clay, they recycle bottles, you can see the bottles there embedded in the walls that actually help to transfer heat into the building. They use bamboo, which is very easy to grow grow. It's very environmentally friendly. It reproduces very quickly. It's very sturdy, and it can bend. So you can get a sense of the challenge that environmentalists and rural communities are bringing to their regions to change the strategy of development from the grassroots up, to fight back against mining and all of its problems and replace it with a different vision of what development should be. Here are just a couple more pictures. You can see that art and beauty and a sort of harmony with nature is a really important part of this development project, this environmentally sustainable house. So there's a couple of the windows. Here's one of the windows that we found really beautiful. But I think that concludes our presentation. We would love to hear from you, love to hear some of your questions. We'll be happy to send you the paper. You see our email addresses are there. You're welcome to contact us if you'd like to talk about questions.
We decided not to print out the paper intentionally because we know a lot of people, I think myself included, go to conferences and then with great intentions you